Hey, this is MJ, and in today's tutorial I'm going to be showing you how to make our granny pop hoodie. So this pattern is similar to our granny pop cardigan, but we have the addition of a hood that I've attached. I've made a button-up collar, and I've also added some pockets. We've also made our sleeves a little bit smaller and added some decreases. So all these extras you're gonna find in this tutorial. So the yarn that I'll be using for this pattern is Mary Maxim Prism in the color Iris. I also recommend the Best Value from Mary Maxim if you prefer in the solid color. You'll also need two hook sizes, so a 5mm and a 4.5mm, and I'm using my Furls Streamline hooks, and these are the Taurus hooks. So I'm going to start off the yoke with the cottonwood, and I will have a longer version of this cardigan shown in this yarn, and then later on in the video, once we get to separating our body and sleeves, I'll be returning to the iris color. But to get you started, I'm just going to be showing you in the cottonwood. So this video assumes that you already know how to crochet and you know your basic stitches. It's not intended to teach you how to crochet. We're just working through the steps of the pattern. It is recommended that you follow along with the written pattern as you go. And in the PDF pattern, I have some helpful row charts to keep you on track of your cluster counts, because that seems to be the most confusing thing for people, is keeping track of their clusters and not ending up with the same clusters as the pattern states. You can easily slow down the tutorial by clicking on the gear icon, which is the settings, which will be found below the video tutorial. So you can adjust the speed to your preference, and there'll also be closed captions in different languages that can be selected as well. I'm currently hosting a crochet along in my Facebook community group, and you'll find all the details in the description box. Make sure to go join in the fun, post your pictures, ask questions, all in our group. So you'll find also the details for the yarn and hooks, links to the pattern, etc., all in the description box below the video. So to begin, we'll start with a chain of 72. And I'm using my larger hook, which is the 5mm. Okay, so once you have your 72 chains, we're going to turn to find those back bumps. We're going to be working in the second chain from the hook and going down into the back bump. So 1, 2, working a single crochet, and we're going to single crochet through those back bumps all the way across. Okay, so once you've worked all the way across, you're going to have a total of 71 stitches. So just make sure to be on track with that. Double check your count so that you are ready for the next step. So all of our sizes will begin the same way. Okay, so the neck opening doesn't need to be drastically different, even though it's sized from extra small to 5X. Our head sizes are not bigger, even when we get a little bit bigger, our head size is not drastically changing. So they can all begin the same. And this is a cardigan, so it's not even needing to go over the head. So I have had that question before come up, so I just wanted to clarify that all the sizes start the same, and you can go to the blog for sizes from extra small to 5X, and I'll be working on the medium size in this tutorial. And this is an oversized fit, so you may want to size down. I generally make myself a small when they're oversized, but I went with the medium for this tutorial. So I'm going to finish now. That takes a little bit to get across. I'm going to finish that off camera, and I'll meet you up. Okay, so I've worked all the way across. Now for row 1, we're going to chain 3 my work turned and work 3 double crochets in the first stitch. Chain 1 and skip the next stitch. This is the start of our front panel, and we'll be making a V in the next stitch, and that's going to separate our front and our sleeve. So to make a V stitch, we're going to work a double crochet, chain 1 and a double crochet. We'll chain 1 and skip the next stitch. We'll work a double crochet in the next 3. Chain 1, skip a stitch, and we're going to do that 3 more times. 1, 2, 3, and chain 1, skip a stitch. So I need to do that 2 more times. I'll do that off camera. Okay, so I have 1, 2, 3, 4 clusters, and this is my first sleeve. And if you have the PDF pattern, I have a chart that will show you for that first row the breakdown of those clusters between the V's, so it can help you stay on track. So we're going to skip that stitch. We'll do a V in the next, because this is now separating. So double crochet, chain 1, double crochet, all in the same space. So this is now separating the sleeve and the back. So chain 1 and skip a stitch. So now we're going to do that repeat 7 times. So we're doing a double crochet in each of the next 3. Chain 1. So we're doing that 7 times across. So I'm going to work those off camera. So this is the back, and then I'll meet you up again. Now, just before I keep continuing, I just want to mention, I know a question that comes up quite a bit. Now, I've already decreased from the last cardigan pattern from having 5 here down to 4. If you wanted to reduce this even further, that start of the sleeve, so the sleeve ends up smaller, you could take out another cluster. So you would be removing 4 stitches from this sleeve, and then you have to remember you would be removing 4 stitches again over on this sleeve. So a total of 8 stitches you would have to reduce your starting foundation chain by. Okay, so that's just a little tip, because the sleeves you still may find a little loose, but you can work the decreases on the sleeve, which we're going to show you how to do in this tutorial as well. Just before I continue, I wanted to fill you in on that, just in case you want to go back and remove another cluster out of that sleeve. So I'm going to work across that I have 7 of these clusters. Okay, so I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I've chained 1, skip a stitch, V stitch, double crochet, chain 1, double crochet, chain 1. Now we're doing the next sleeve section. So that is a repeat of our double crochet in the next 3, chain 1, 4 times, because we have 1, 2, 3, 4. So double crochet, 1, 2, 3, and chain 1. So I'm going to do the other 3 off camera, and then I'll meet you up again. Okay, so if we count, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, chain 1 and skip a stitch, and we're doing a V to separate our sleeve and our front panel now. Chain 1, V, chain 1, and we're skipping a stitch, and in the very last stitch we're going to have 3 double crochet. And if you worked across correctly, you should be ending with those 2 stitches and ending with your 4 DC. And that, I would say, is the hardest part of getting the yoke started. So once you have it started, it's really easy to continue. So little tip with the sleeves and the back, each row will be going up 1 cluster for those sections. So try and keep track of that as you go to make sure you don't get off. And we're going to do a front panel increase for row 2. So let's get started with that. So we're going to chain 3, turn, and when we do that increase, we need to put our cluster between the first and second double crochet. So we're going to go 3, 1, 2, 3, chain 1, and then we're going to put, so every chain 1 space will have 3 DC, which is a cluster. So if I refer to cluster, I mean 3 DC and a chain 1. But now we're coming to the V-stitch. So we have no more chain 1 spaces to work into. So every time you come to a V-stitch, you're going to work a V in the V-stitch. Always chaining 1 between everything and a V-stitch in the V. So double crochet, chain 1, double crochet. If we forget at all to work that chain 1, it can throw you off and you may miss a cluster. So really try to make sure to get those chain 1s between everything. So now in every chain 1 space, we're working a cluster chain 1. Okay, so our cluster is 3 double crochets. Chain 1. I'm going to repeat that all the way across to my next V. So let's do one more together. 1, 2, 3, chain 1. Okay, so chain 1, I'm coming to another V stitch. So a V in the V stitch. Double crochet, chain 1, double crochet. Chain 1, and right into this next chain 1 space, a cluster chain 1. So as you can see, you can easily just follow along. So every time you're at a chain 1 space, you're doing your cluster chain 1. When we come to that V stitch again, put a V stitch into that stitch, work across the next sleeve, a cluster chain 1 in every chain 1 space. We get to another V stitch, we do a V stitch in the V stitch, and I'm going to work across that bit, and then I'm going to meet you up down at the end so you stay on track. Okay, so I work to the V. I have my V in my V stitch. I'm going to chain 1. I'm going to work a cluster chain 1 in that first chain 1 space. And now we need another cluster in between the third DC and the turning chain. We're going to put 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so now let's take a look. Our yoke, you are seeing it's kind of coming together. It's sort of taking its shape. And like I told you before, we're going up by a cluster each section. So the front, we've gone up to 2 now. Our sleeve section's gone up to 5. Our back has now gone up to 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So this sleeve 5 and then the front 2. But we're not going to increase every front, so just pay attention to the pattern. So when we're on a chain 4 row, we're not increasing. So row 3 is going to be starting with that chain 4. And our chain 4 counts as a double crochet and a chain 1 here and throughout the pattern. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And then we're going to do a cluster chain 1 in each chain 1 space to the next V. So cluster, chain 1, cluster, chain 1. Okay, so you can see here we did an increase. We had 2 clusters this row. We're having 2 clusters this row. It's a chain 4 row. So just get that in your head that when you're on those chain 4 rows, we're not increasing. So now we're getting to the V. We need to work a V in the V stitch. Chain 1. Cluster chain 1 in each chain 1 space across to our next V. Chain 1, cluster, chain 1. So I'm going to keep working that across all the way now. We're just doing the same pattern. So cluster chain 1, each chain 1 space across, V stitch, work a V stitch, and continue, okay? And then I'll meet you up at the end just to show you how to finish it off. Okay, so now in the turning chain, we're going to work a double crochet. Okay, so that is completing row 3. So now onto row 4, we're going to chain 3. And in the chain 1 space, we'll be working a cluster chain 1. So 1, 2, 3, chain 1. And we'll be doing this row just the same. So working a cluster chain 1 in all the chain 1 spaces, V's and the V stitches. So let me just go across the front panel. So this time we have our front panel up to 3. Okay, so I'm going to go all the way across and we're going to end with 4 double crochet in the last space, chain 1 space. Okay, so I've chain 1 and in the final chain 1 space, we're working 4 double crochets. 2, 3, 4. Okay, so now we're on to row 5, and this is going to be another increase. So when we're doing another front panel increase, if I were to go to a chain 4 again, we would stay at 3 clusters, but we want to go up to 4 clusters. So I'm going to chain 3, and then I'm going to go between the first double crochet and the second double crochet and make a cluster. So 1, 2, 3, chain 1. Okay, so now that's going to be the pattern across. So cluster chain 1 and V's in the V stitches. So complete that across and then I'll meet you up at the end again. Okay, so I'm coming up to the end here, finishing off this cluster, chain 1, and between the third double crochet and the turning chain, we're going to add 4. 1, 2, 2, 3, and 4. Okay, so now ending at row 5, you count all your clusters up together, you should have a total of 35 clusters and 4 V-stitches if you count everything up. So at this point now, we're just doing repeats. So you're going to repeat. Now follow along with your pattern for the size that you're working on. We're working on the medium in the tutorial. So we're going to work through 3 to 5 twice. So repeat now rows 3, 4, and 5 2 times. Then you're going to repeat row 3 and 4, and then row 3. So we're ending on row 14 for size medium, and we're ending with a row 3, okay? So that we're going up to 14 rows. You're going to repeat rows 3 through 5 twice. Then you're gonna repeat row 3, row 4, and row 3, okay? But the pattern details that out, and if you purchase the PDF, you'll have the chart, so it's really easy to stay on track. It will show you the cluster count for each row, all of the cluster counts for each sizes, and what row to repeat. So now I can work up this off camera, and then we're going to meet back up when we're going to separate out the body and sleeve once I've worked all 14 rows. So I've been working on my yoke, and I've worked a total of 14 rounds of our clusters, and it's easy to count them just up the side. So I have a total of 14, and if I separate out my sections, my front section has a total of 9 clusters. My sleeve has a total of 17. My back has a total of 20. And then this sleeve is 17 and this front is 9. And then you should have your 4 V stitches. So that will just help to make sure that you're on track at this point. And in the PDF pattern, I do have a row chart that will take you through each row going up all the way to 5x, so you can follow along, and you may find that helpful if you're struggling with your cluster counts. And so at this point, what we're going to do, you can also look at the chart to see that we are ending on row 3, which should be ending with the 1 double crochet in the turning chain. So we're now going to chain 3. I'm going to turn my work, and we're going to work across the front panel with our clusters. So cluster, chain 1, and in the next chain 1 space, and I'm going to work across to the V stitch. Okay, so we're coming up to the V stitch. You want to make sure you add your cluster in the last chain 1 space. Okay, and now we're going to chain 1, and we're skipping the V. We're going to skip the entire sleeve section. So you need to come across to your next V stitch. Okay, find the V, which is right here, and we're just going right into the next chain 1 space after the V. And continue like there is no sleeve. So we're just working together our front and our back. Chain 1, and continue to cluster chain 1 across to the next V-stitch. So you'll work all the way across the back. Okay, so I've worked all the way across the back. I'm coming to the next V-stitch. I've already worked my cluster chain 1, and now we'll be skipping over this entire sleeve section, coming to the next V-stitch, and we're going to skip the V-stitch and right into our next chain 1 space. We're just going to continue working our cluster chain 1. Okay, and we're going to finish that going right across our next front panel. We're going to end with 4 double crochet in that final space. Okay, so I've worked all the way across. So we've gone across the front, we've skipped the sleeve, we've gone across the back, skipping this sleeve, and I finished now across this front panel. And for our medium size, you should have a total of 41 clusters. So I've counted them all the way across. Now we're just going to be working back and forth in rows, working the fronts and the backs, the fronts and the back all as one piece now. So we're going to chain 4. Okay, turn, and we'll be skipping over this cluster, going into the chain 1 space, working a cluster chain 1. Cluster chain 1, and when you get here to the underarm, remember there is a chain 1 here. This is a chain 1 space you're working into as well. You're not skipping over that. So we're going to continue across, working a cluster in the chain 1 space at the underarm, working all the way across the back, and again over here there's a chain 1 space. You'll be working your cluster in that chain 1 space as well. Okay, so I worked across the row and we're ending with a double crochet in the turning chain. And because this row starts and ends with the double, we only have 40 clusters across. So our last row had 41 and this row has 40. And the reason they alternate is just due to the doubles being at the start and end of this row and the clusters being at the start and end of this row. So now what you're going to do is continue working back and forth in rows. So you'll be alternating between the starting cluster and the starting double, and you will crochet a total of 16 rows for the crop length. You're welcome to alter the length to any length that you want. You just need to account for the additional yarn you'll need if you make it longer. So I'm making mine a crop length. So I'm going to do a total of 16 rows. Okay, so I've been working on the cardigan. I have my total of 16 rows for the body. And now we're going to work a chain 1 and turn. And you should be on your right side of your work. I'm going to work a single crochet, and in the chain 1 space, a single crochet, and I'm going to work a single crochet across the doubles, and then I am going to skip this chain 1 space and just single crochet in our double crochet stitches. So skipping all of the chain 1s and just working in the double crochets across. Now, if you're working a longer cardigan, I would suggest maybe working in the chain 1 spaces, and it will make your band not quite as tight. But because this one is going around roughly our waist, I'd like it to cinch in a little bit. So you can alter this up depending on how you want that finished band to look. So if you want it to be a little bit looser, then just work singles in the chain 1 spaces. Okay, so I'm coming to the end, and in that turning chain, I'm going to work 2 single crochet. So you should have a total of 124 stitches. So we have 40 clusters on this row times 3 plus 2 at the start and 2 at the end equals 124. And if you have worked in the chain 1, all the chain 1 spaces, you'll have some more stitches than that. And I will work that out in the pattern for you, just in case you're making the longer version. So now what I want to do is change over to my 4.5 millimeter crochet hook for the join as you go band. And at this point, you could also change color. So if you wanted to coordinate this with the best value yarn, you could do the nice platinum. It would look really nice with this color. So if you don't like the color changes that you'll see happening with the prism yarn, then you could go ahead and you could work in a solid color all of the ribbing, and I think that would look really nice too. But I really love that sort of ombre effect, so I'm just going to keep the this entire sweater all in the prism. But this would look really nice if you really like that consistent look, because sometimes you don't know what you're going to get with the color changes. So I know some people prefer this look, so whatever you prefer, you go with that. So you'll want to chain out 11. And this will be the same when you're working your cuff as well. It's going to be the same method. So we're going to work in the second chain from the hook, a single crochet and a single crochet into each chain across. So you'll end up with 10 stitches for the band, and we'll have 10 stitches for the cuff as well. We'll also do this for the collar, but we will be making buttonholes in the collar as well. So here's our first stitch. We're going to skip that. Okay, so that will account for this first row we've already worked. And then we'll slip stitch into the next 2 stitches along our band. We're going to turn, keep our work to the back, and then we're going to single crochet in the back loops only. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. You should have 10 stitches. Then we'll chain 1 and turn. Okay, and then we'll work single crochets in the back loop only all the way down. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I like to count 2 as I go because it's sometimes really easy to miss a stitch and you want your band to end up even. Now, because this yarn, I know I've had this question before, it can sometimes go a little thick to thin. Even though it's acrylic, it is like a roving type yarn. So sometimes the band may look a little off, but as long as you have the right stitch count, don't worry about that. And also using the solid color would eliminate sort of any differences in the yarn if that also is an issue for you. So as we can see here, I'm attached to this stitch, so I need to slip stitch into the next 2. So we've worked 3 rows. That accounts for 3 stitches. Okay, so we're working the same number of rows as we have stitches along the base. So slip stitch in the next 2. And then we're going to work 2 more rows. So we'll turn and continue. So we're going to continue like this all the way across. Now, because we started with that 1 row accounting for that first stitch, and then we're going by 2s, you're going to end up with only 1 stitch to slip stitch into at the end, so we can even up to those 124 rows. So keep working like this, but when you get to the end, you're going to have only 1 slip stitch remaining. You'll slip stitch, work all the way back up, and fasten off. So just continue in this manner. And like I say, this is going to cinch in. If you're working on the crop version, this is going to cinch in at the waist. And if you're working on the longer version, it still may cinch in a little bit, but you can block it out so that it's the same width as the cardigan, because you don't want it super tight around your hip thigh area, or unless you do want that, and then that would be the look you're going for. But I don't want, when I'm wearing a longer cardigan, for it to cinch in down there. So I'm going to continue now working this off camera, and I'll meet you back up for the next step. Okay, so I'm going to show you how to join on and work our hood. I'm just going to choose how I want the color to join in. I think I'm just going to go with the gray. As you can see here, we go from purple to gray. So I think I'm okay with shifting from this dark purple to the gray. If you want it to start with the dark purple, then you can always pull off a section of your ball. Let me see, maybe I should. It's so hard sometimes to know. I think I'm gonna go with the gray and just join on with that. So I'm gonna get a slip knot. I'm gonna put that on my larger hook, making sure I have my 5mm. We're going to come up to the corner. So this is the right-hand side, and this is our foundation row that we started with. We're gonna find that very first stitch. Going to chain 3, and we're gonna make a cluster in this very first stitch, okay? So we're gonna work 3 double crochets. Okay, so I've worked the 3 double crochets. I'm going to chain 1. I'm going to skip the next stitch, and then I'll work a double crochet in the next 3. Chain 1, we're going to skip the next stitch. We're going to double crochet in the next 3, and we're going to repeat this all the way around our neckline here. So this is setting us up for those clusters. So chain 1, skip a stitch, 3 double crochet, chain 1, skip a stitch, and we're just going to repeat that around. So I'll meet you up when I get to the other side, because we're going to finish with the cluster and the end. Okay, so as we come up to the end, there should just be 2 stitches remaining. I've chained 1, and we're going to work 4 double crochet into the last stitch. So you should have a total of 19 clusters. So that's counting our 3 DCs together as clusters. And now we're just going to get back into this pattern that you should be familiar with at this point, alternating our start rows with clusters and our chain 4 rows. So we'll chain 4, turn, so we're going to skip over that cluster. In the first chain 1 space, we're going to work 3 double crochets. Chain 1, cluster in the next chain 1 space, 1, 2, 3, chain 1, and we're just repeating this all the way across. So 1, 2, 3, chain 1. So cluster chain 1 in every chain 1 space across. And I will meet you up at the end. Okay, so once you get to the end, I've chained 1, and in that turning chain, we're going to work a double crochet. Our next row is we chain 3, turn, and in the chain 1 space, we're working 3 doubles. So we're going to be alternating these rows back and forth till we have our total length of our hood. So we're working our cluster chain 1 in every chain 1 space across. Okay, so the hood's going to be worked this way. So if you were to take this here and fold it, this is going to be sort of the depth going back of the hood. If you wanted to make it larger than this, if you wanted it bigger, you could always do some increases, but I'm just going to keep it all consistent. Going back and forth, I'm not going to add any increases. So the starting row started with 19 clusters, then we are at 18 with the 2 double crochet, and then we're back to 19 clusters on this row. So I'm going to pop up directions on how many rows to complete for the hood, and then I will meet you back up to show you how to seam up the top of the hood and move on to the next step. So I'll work that across and finish it off with you. So once we get to our turning chain at the end, we're going to add 4 double crochet. Okay, and we'll be repeating row 2 and 3 now. And I'm ending on that cluster row. So now what I'm going to do is chain 1, and we want to fold that the right sides are facing. And we're going to slip stitch now the hood together. I'm just going through each stitch. And at the chain 1 spaces, we're just going to go through the spaces, making a slip stitch, and then just continue slip stitching through each stitch across. Okay, and once you've worked all the way, we can just fasten that off. Okay, and that tail can you can weave that in. And that's how the top should look, and I will steam that out. Now, if you don't like this ridge that slip stitching it creates, you can always just whip stitch it, fasten off, and whip stitch that closed as well. So either way is fine. It'll keep it nice and flat if you do a whip stitch instead. Okay, so now let's take a look at the sleeve. Make sure we're gonna find the right side. And I'm going to put a slip knot on my hook. So now you want to look at your sleeve opening, and you're going to notice we have a V-stitch here and we have a V-stitch here as well. So what I'm going to do is slip stitch into the V-stitch to the right of the underarm, skipping over all of this section. We're going over to the V-stitch to the left of our underarm. And we can use this tail to sew. See how this hole under the arm is going to be a little bit bigger? You can just add a stitch or two, maybe to the gray section, just to pull that in a little bit. And now I'm going to slip stitch in to our first chain one space. Going to chain 3 and work 2 double crochets, chain 1. So I've worked the first cluster, and now I'll work my next cluster, chain 1, in the next chain 1 space. So there's 1, 2, 3, chain 1. We'll work to the next chain 1 space. So 3 double crochets to make our cluster and chain 1. So I'm going to work that all the way around. Okay, so I'm coming all the way around, and this here is my final chain 1 space, and you should have 18 clusters for the medium size. Chain 1. Now I'm going to slip stitch in that starting chain 3 to join. Going to chain 3, and I'm going to turn. Okay, so I'm going to be working this sleeve all in the round and turning. That's going to keep our join line right at the underarm. So I'll work 2 double crochets to make our first cluster and a chain 1. And then in each chain 1 space, we'll be working a cluster, chain 1. Okay, so I'm going to work that all the way around, and then the next round I'll show you how to do a decrease. Okay, so I've worked all the way around. I've already chained 1. I'm going to slip stitch in the chain 3 to join, chain 3 and turn. So now for round 3, we're going to do a decrease, but I'm going to do it at the end of the round. So I'm going to work my clusters all the way around until I come to my last 2 chain 1 spaces, and then I'll meet you up to show you how to decrease. So work our first cluster, chain 1, cluster, chain 1 in each chain 1 space to the last 2 chain 1 spaces. Okay, so I'm going to continue that around, and I'll meet you up for that decrease. Okay, so to work a cluster decrease, I'm going to yarn over, go through, so we have 2 chain 1 space left, 2 chain 1 spaces left. So we're going to make our double crochet, yarn over, go through the chain 1 space, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, go through the next chain 1 space, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 3, and then we'll work another double crochet. Chain 1 and slip stitch in the chain 3 to join, chain 3 and turn, and then we'll work our cluster chain 1 in each chain 1 space around. So now we've reduced to 17 clusters, and you can continue decreasing. I suggest every 3rd row. I'm only doing 2 decreases because I don't want to narrow out my sleeve too much. That's the style I'm going for. But if you want to narrow it out even more going down to the cuff, I suggest every 3rd round doing that decrease. Okay, so I'm going to complete this around, and then I'm going to do an additional round before I do the next decrease. So this round plus 1 more, then I'll meet you back up. Okay, so I'm just completing round 5. Slip stitch to join and chain 3, turn. So this decrease will be on round 6, which is working on the wrong side. So I'll cluster chain 1 and cluster chain 1 in each chain 1 space around until we get to the last 2 chain 1 spaces. Chain 1. So I will keep working that around and I'll meet you up at the end. Okay, so I've worked all the way around. I'm to my last 2 chain 1 spaces. So let's do the cluster decrease. We're going to work a double crochet, yarn over, go back through the same chain 1 space, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, go through the next chain 1 space, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 3, and then work another double crochet. Chain 1 and slip stitch to join. Now you're just going to continue working rounds back and forth just like this until you have a total of 26 rounds, or try it on as you go, and you can shorten it or lengthen it depending on your arm length. And once we have that complete, I'll meet you back up to show you how to finish it off and make your cuff. Okay, so I've worked a total of 26 rounds. Now I'm going to chain 1 and turn. I'm going to work a single crochet in the chain 1 space, a single crochet in the center double crochet of the cluster, so the second, and in the chain 1 space, and the second double crochet. I'm going to do that all the way around. So I've worked around a total of 32. I'm going to slip stitch to join. And I'm going to change over to my smaller hook, and the cuff will be worked identically to the band. So I'm going to chain out 11. Single crochet in the second chain from the hook, each chain across, for a total of 10. So this time we'll work around, we'll have a total of 32 rows, and then we can slip stitch together the cuff. So I'm skipping the first stitch, slip stitching into the next 2. Okay, and then working in the back loop only. So I'm not going to go through all that again because we've already covered this with the band. Okay, so once you're finished with the cuff, I'm going to chain 1, and then I'm going to slip stitch it together. So what I do to get right sides facing, I usually just fold it like this. You can also fasten off with a tail and just sew this section, or if you don't want to fasten off and you just want to finish it, you can just slip stitch it. Okay, so just slip stitch through each stitch, going through one side and across to the other side. And then once that's complete, you can just fasten off and weave in your tail. So now we need to join on to start our edging. It's going to go all the way around the cardigan, and then we'll do our ribbing with some buttonholes. But let's start out with adding. So we'll put a slip knot on our hook. I have my smaller hook, and I'm going to join with a slip stitch, chain one, and I'll be working single crochets across the band. Okay, so you should be working across 10 stitches. And I'm going to add one stitch in here as well. And then we're going to get to our granny stitch pattern. And at this point, we're going to do 2 single crochets per row. So in our large chain space, we'll do 2. Then in our cluster, we'll do 2. And then our chain 2 space, we'll do 2. So we're going to work all the way around the cardigan. So I'm going to keep working up to the hood. Now, this is where you'd also, if you're using a solid color, you're going to want to work around. If you're using the silver or a different color, you're going to want to go around in that as you work. I also suggest going with the darker color in your, if possible, with the yarn that you have. I think it just looks a little bit nicer. Okay, so as I get to the hood, this foundation row here, I'm going to do 1 single, and then just get right into 2 for every row of the hood. Okay, so this is how we're just doing this all the way around, all the way down to the band on the other side. So I'm just going to complete this off camera, and then I'll meet you up to show you how to mark off your buttonholes. Okay, so next you want to lay out your buttons. If you only wanted 4 buttons, spread your 4 buttons out. If you want 5 buttons, really whatever you think. I might only do 4. So just roughly put them where you want. And then what I like to do is go by an estimate of how many stitches in between, and then I make sure they're all even. So I'm gonna grab some stitch markers. This is where the stitch markers come in handy to mark where you want your buttonholes. Okay, so I've marked out where I feel the buttons are gonna look nice. So I've gone up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stitches from the bottom. So I've marked that 5th stitch, and then I've gone 1, 2, all the way up and marked then the 14th stitch. So 13 stitches in between and the 14th stitch. And now if you have altered the length of your cardigan, if you want more buttons, you can just move these stitch markers how you want them. So don't worry if your cardigan's longer and it doesn't fit just like I've space them out. Now, if you're doing it exactly the same as mine, I think this looks good. But if you've made your cardigan longer, if you've made it shorter, just play around with your stitch markers. I'm going in sort of the center of my button where I'm placing that, because that's where the hole will be. So the button will sit sort of in the center here, like that. Okay, so now I'm gonna start working on the ribbing and show you how to make these buttonholes. So we'll start out doing our ribbing here, just like I've been showing you how to do the other bands and cuffs. So we're going to chain out 11, 2, 3, 4. Okay, and then in the second chain from the hook, we'll work single crochets. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, so then what we're going to do, again, I'm using the smaller hook just so you're sure that we're still with the smaller hook here. We're skipping that first edging stitch, going to slip stitch into the next 2. Turn, and in the back loop only, we're going to single crochet back up. So there's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Chain 1 and turn. Okay, I'm going to work back down. So I'm going to work back down and then I'll meet you up again. Okay, so now we'll slip stitch in the next 2. And as you can see, the second stitch that we're slip stitching into is a buttonhole. So that will mean the buttonhole will need to be made coming down that last row. Okay, so I'm going to work back up just as normal. Okay, so I've chained 1 and I'm turning, and it doesn't matter whether we're coming up or coming down, it's going to be worked the same way. What we'll do is work 4 stitches in the back loop. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Then we'll chain 2 and we'll skip 2 stitches and then work 1, 2, 3, 4. Now these buttons are 35 mil size, so depending on the size of your button, you may want to alter this. This is going to be snug, but I'd rather it be a little snug getting over the button than too loose and over time it stretch out and not hold the button. So I'm going with a chain 2, skip 2 for my buttonhole, and that I feel is a good size for this button. Now I'll slip stitch into the next 2. I'm going to turn, and then the next row, what happens is we'll work back loop, single crochet, 4 stitches. Okay, and then in the chain 2 space, we're just working 2 single crochet. 1, 2, 3, 4, chain 1 and turn. Now what you can do is we can always test this out to make sure I can get it through. It is actually kind of tight. This is where you can test out for yourself as well. Okay, it is a little snug, but it will go through. So 3 stitches. The only problem with the 3 stitches, it will make it uneven. We'd have to do 3 stitches on one side, 4 stitches on the other. But if you need to go another stitch to make it work, just do what you need to do to make it work. That's what I suggest. But they will, with a little fiddling, go through, and like I say, that will stretch out over time. So we're just going to go back and forth, working rows and slip stitching it to the edge. And every time you come to a stitch marker, you're going to work a buttonhole. So whether that be the row going upwards or downwards, it doesn't matter. You're just working it the same way. And I hope this makes you feel that buttonholes aren't so difficult. You can use this technique for any pattern that has a similar type ribbing. Really easy to add those buttonholes in. So I'm going to continue working this now. Working my buttonhole rows at the marked stitches. Okay, so I'm just going to continue now off camera. I'm going to work away at this. And then what we do when we finish is we just sew the buttons opposite the buttonholes on the ribbing on this side. Okay, so I finished working my ribbing around. So this is how the hood's looking. And just so you know, it looks a lot smaller than it is. I scrunched all my ribbing in for pictures to make it look like that. But if you don't scrunch it, it's gonna look much bigger. But you can scrunch it in. So I finished, I worked all the way down, fastened off. I got all my tails woven in, but I did leave one of the underarms that I can show you. So here is the buttons. I just went and made sure that I was sewing them directly across from where I made my holes. And I just knotted and trimmed my tails. You could weave your tails. I just knotted them really well and trimmed them. So now I've also already added a pocket. It's optional whether you want to add this or not, but I'm going to work through the pocket with you to show you how to do that next. But just before I hop into that, let's go over to that tail at the underarm, because I have gotten this question on how to sew it. So I just want to show you how I do it, just so that you are on the right track. So I just take my yarn needle and I only want to pull together those stitches. I'm going to leave these ones, and this really even is optional. You're not even going to notice because it's so holy as it is. So all I do is go through, I'm just adding a couple stitches to just pull that together. Okay, and then you just want to weave that tail. I'm just going to go one way. I'm going to go back in the opposite direction just to make sure it's good and secure. So really simple, but even if you don't close that up, you're not even going to notice, so it's not a huge deal. Okay, so just trim that off. So this is a big oversized fit. Just so you know, this, I probably should have made the small, not the medium. It is quite big on me, but I know this is the style to have these big oversized hoodies and sweaters, and I know my youngest daughter is actually going to probably snatch it up for me, and she loves to get everything in a large because she wants it big and oversized, so I know she's going to like this. So the finished bust is probably about, I have to check the PDF again, but I believe it's 43 inches. So you're getting lots, like I'm about 36-inch bust, so that's giving me about 7 inches of ease. So it's nice and big and oversized. So that's something to consider when you are choosing your size. You may want to go down one if you don't want that really big oversized fit. If you wanted it a really close fit, you could even probably go down 2 sizes, but I would say 1 size, you're safe. So when a pattern has a pocket, it's always a great place to start if you want to make a gauge swatch with your pocket. It's just, it gets you on track, it's simple, it's quick, and then you have a pocket done and your swatch as well. As long as your pocket is a fair size, it's not too small, then a pocket is a good way to make your gauge swatch. So we're going to start out with a slip knot on our hook, and we're going to chain 20. And now in the second chain from the hook, we're going to turn and go into that back bump, and we'll work single crochets in the back bumps of the chain. Now, if for any reason you're struggling with that, just go in the back loop of the chain. This just makes a little bit nicer edge for sewing the pocket on across the bottom. And I just love the finish of doing this. So I usually go in the back hump whenever I'm starting off a project with a chain. Okay, so you should have 19. And now I'm going to chain 3. And work 3 double crochets in the same stitch. Now I'll chain 1, skip a stitch, work a double crochet in each of the next 3. Chain 1, skip a stitch, work a double crochet in each of the next 3. Chain 1, skip a stitch, double crochet in each of the next 3. 1, 2, 3, chain 1, skip a stitch, double crochet in each of the next 3. Chain 1, skip a stitch, and in the last stitch we're going to work 4 double crochet. And don't worry that that starting foundation row is a little bit skinnier than the rest of the pocket. That's completely okay. All right, so let's take a look. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 clusters. No, this isn't quite into our cluster yet, but we're gonna count that as a cluster. And now we're going to chain 4. Okay, turn our work. And now in the chain 1 spaces, we'll be doing a cluster chain 1. So 1, 2, 3, chain 1. And we're going to repeat that across in each chain 1 space. Chain 1. I'm just going to work this across now. So I've already chained 1, and now in the turning chain we're going to work a double crochet. And now if we look at this, we've got 5 clusters and 2 double crochets. So 6. So we're going to alternate between 6 and 5, 6 and 5 as we work. 1, 2, 3, and then we'll work 3 double crochets in the chain 1 space. Chain 1, chain 1, and work all the way across. Okay, so I've ended with 4 double crochets in our final stitch, back up to 6 clusters, and now this is row 3, this is row 4. So we're going to alternate rows 3 and 4 until we have a total of 10 rows. Okay, so I've worked my total of 10 rows, and I have this gauge tool. You can just use a measuring tape, really whatever you want. I find the work does stretch out a bit once you've made it, so I like to kind of just give it a little bit of stretch. I'm not blocking it or anything, I'm just giving it a little bit of a stretch, just because I know this yarn, when I get working with it, it will stretch out a bit. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 rows, 1, 2, 3, 4 clusters, and 1, 2, 3, 4 chain 1 spaces. So that makes it really simple, but you can just use a regular measuring tape and measure as well. I got this gauge tool from We Crochet, so I really like having that on hand because it does really help, and that's why you need to make it bigger so that you can kind of play around, get in a good spot. You could probably even do a few more rows because our first row here is just a single crochet. Okay, so once you've worked up your 10 rows, 1 is the foundation row, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I'm going to chain 1 and turn, and we're working single crochets just in our double crochet stitches. So 1, 2, 3, 4. We're going to skip that chain 1 space, and we're just working across in our chain, or in our double crochets. So we will end up with a total of 20 stitches worked across the top. Okay, so we do need to add 1 in the turning chain. Okay, and you should have 20 stitches. And now we're going to change over to the smaller hook, which is our 4.5 millimeter. And we'll do a join as you go band. So this is worked just like I've already shown you, but we're not going to make it as wide. So I'm only going to chain out 6. Okay, and in the second chain from the hook, we're going to work a single, so that we have 5 stitches. So this is half the size of our other bands. So we're skipping the first stitch, slip stitch into the next 2. Okay, and then we're turning, work single crochets in the back loop. Chain 1 and turn, single crochets in the back loop. And slip stitch into the next 2. Okay, so we're just going to repeat this all the way across the pocket. Okay, so I finished off with slip stitching into only one stitch. We come back up and we fasten off, which works out perfectly so that we can have a long tail for sewing. So I like to take a big long tail so that I don't run out. And you can fasten off. Pull that through. Okay, so this part is going to pull it in a little bit. That's okay. You can weave in this tail on the bottom. Now, also I want to mention, for the larger sizes, if you wanted to make a bigger pocket, you could easily do that. Just add your multiple of 4 to the starting chain. So we started it with 20. You could continue adding multiples of 4 to make it bigger. This pocket will fit on the extra small cardigan. I'm putting it on the medium, so even maybe large, extra large, the size pocket will look okay, but you could maybe make it a bit bigger. Otherwise, if you want to keep the pocket the same, even on the bigger sweaters, that's completely fine too. And I've left the pattern at that. It's a hand size. It's a good size. I think maybe if you're making a longer cardigan, a bigger pocket might look nice. I'm not sure. You can always judge it yourself, like put your cardigan in front of you, start working your rows and just kind of see how it looks. If you think you want it bigger, go bigger. If you're even working on maybe the extra small, you want it a little bit smaller, that's fine too. But this will fit on your extra small cardigan. Make sure it's laid out nice and flat so you can see your front panel. Now I've already evened my pocket up and sewn on one, so I already know where I want it, so it's a little easier for me this time because I centered it out. And you will have to stretch it a bit as you're sewing. You could even pin this down so it doesn't move. I went 2 rows up from the bottom, so I've got 2 rows of clusters, so I know I need to have 2 rows of clusters on this side, and I have 3 clusters here across. So 1, 2, 3. So I use that as a guide as I sewed the pocket all the way down, and then used the row as a guide going across. And I made sure I used those clusters again as a guide, sewing back up the other side. So we're starting, I think it made it a bit easier on this side because I was right here. So what I would do is see how many clusters I went across as to where to start over here. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I've sewn it to the 6. So I've sewn it to this one and this one. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in between. You just need to get it all basically laid out, pin it to make sure that you're sewing it. And don't weave in your tails until the very end. Make sure that you don't have to make any adjustments. There's nothing worse than finishing this off and then having crooked pockets that don't look good that you need to rip out. So make sure that you do your due diligence, get them pinned in place, make sure everything is even before you start sewing. Once you start sewing, it's not so bad. You just need to follow the guides of the stitches and having a good needle. This one's nice and sharp. I really like, sometimes I'll go to the fabric stores and pick up the sewing needles that are nice and sharp. Okay, so I've got that tail taken care of. Okay, so once I had my spot picked out for this side, I'm going to make sure that I follow these clusters downwards correctly, because it's really hard when this is kind of on, almost looks like it's on a bit of an angle. If you get your clusters lined up here, it's gonna help. And 1, 2, So I need to come all the way down to here like this. I also counted my clusters up from what I did on the other side. First side's always the easiest. The second side, you want to make sure it matches. So I one, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Okay, I think I've got it right now. I need it to be up to 16. So I've got it in the right place now. Now I'm gonna start sewing down, making sure I stay aligned with my clusters. Just grabbing a little bit of the sweater, just kind of off the side of the cluster that I'm aligning. Okay, so I'm just going to continue that all the way down. I'm going to make sure that it's pulled as I go so that I have 2 rows, and then I have to make sure that I have 3 clusters on this side too. So I'm just going to, it's hard to show you on camera to keep it all even, so I'm going to go ahead and do it off camera so I can make sure it's sewn on evenly. Okay, I've worked all the way up to the top, and then once you get that secured, you're just going to want to weave in that tail. Now I'm just going to weave it to the inside of my work. Okay, so here is the completed cardigan. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. If you did, please give this video a thumbs up. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel and tap the bell so you stay updated on all my new video tutorials. So for the details on this pattern, it does come in extra small to 5X. And if you click through the link in the description box, you're going to get all of the details on where to buy the pattern, where to go to the blog. It is free on the blog for subscribers only, so the link will be there for that. The yarn that I use, the hooks, all those links, also details about the crochet along, which will be going from September 7th through to the 21st of 2023. So if you're watching this at a later date, crochet along is no longer available, but if you're wanting to work on this right away at the release of this video, you can head over to my Facebook community group. And even if after the fact, what you want to do is go and join my Facebook community group, and that's where you can get pattern support. Everyone in the group is amazing. They can help you out. To the size my business has grown, it's really difficult for me to get to all of the questions. So if you go over to the community group, that is where you can get support. I have an assistant that helps with comments on the YouTube channel, but she can't answer specific pattern related questions. So if you go to the group, then there's going to be lots of other crocheters in there that have made my patterns that can give you assistance. So make sure to join the group and post your pictures, share your projects. We love to see all of the things you're making with my patterns.